There we go.
Hi,
Good
I'm Valerie
morning.
Mann. Good morning. Who are you?
I'm Cathryn Amidei.
I'm here with Cathryn Amidei this morning, and we are talking about the creative process. And Cathryn is our newest member at WSG Gallery, and she is a weaver, and we are so excited that she is one of us. And we're going to talk a little bit about the creative process. And she has an interesting technique and uses tools that the rest of us don't use, and just a fascinating process that she uses. And so I wanted to ask you this morning, Cathryn, and we had a great conversation last week, and I was so sorry we didn't have it recorded, because it's a conversation that that's very similar to one I have with a friend who is an artist I've known for 30 years since grad school. And we find ourselves just taken with this conversation over and over about ideas, about art, making art, and the fact that it's work. And so I just wanted to ask you about how you generate your ideas.
So I think in some cases I'm almost like the last to know about things that I'm doing. I took an assessment. I needed to write something for a show that I was in. I just needed to write it. I spoke off the cuff one time too many and really hated how I presented what I did. And so I just sat down and started to write. And that writing actually has become a part of what I'm doing now. And so in part, the writing helps me generate ideas. And one of the ideas that I uncovered or realized was that I've been interested in sort of two basic elements. One is this idea of contact, or it's based basically on the technique that I use, which is interlacement. So things that intersect or come up against one another, boundaries. When I was in grad school, I thought I was interested in culture contact and the outcomes from that contact. And I think about color actually as being a kind of a culture. And so when I considered that, there was that contact thing, and then also movement. And when I looked at my work, I've done just everything I've done, it has some sense of movement in it, like literally feet moving, people dancing, things like that. And underneath it, even when it isn't there, it's there for me. And so when I sat down and started to write, I started to realize that those two ideas connected to the concept of, why I'm doing this, because it's a pain in the ass. And so there's so much about it, right? And when I listen to other artists talk, who I would say, oh, they just draw, which is completely wrong. That's not what they're just doing. But I think that's it. They're done. For me, that would be like step 1A, right?
Right.
And so, why am I doing this process? Why am I weaving? And why am I weaving imagery? And I've often heard people say, if I want to do imagery, I'll just do imagery. This whole that word "just," I just think it's expunged. And so I started to think about the process of weaving in a different way. Like, what is it about weaving that connects me to these ideas that I think of as being just below the surface or right in the face, but you sort of look right past them like a veil. And I realized that for me, weaving is the most real way that I have of representing those ideas about movement, about trajectories and paths, our life path or universal paths, or just the sense of movement and the idea of beginnings or endings being not necessarily one that you can really see at all. Mm-hmm. And the idea of things that occur on those paths, those intersections, those interlacements, those collisions and the boundaries. And
I have do you mind if I interrupt you for a second?
No, not at
So
all.
I want to ask you about that. So of course you and I talked before, and I have a whole list of questions. I have a feeling I'm not going to ask any of them, right?
Right.
And so what I wanted to ask was, when you're talking about the culture, would you say the culture
Contact.
culture contact? To me, so I just want to ask you to clarify that, but I want to just say what that brings up for me when I'm thinking about. So one of the things I think about in my work is where edges meet.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm a hiker and a bird watcher. And so one of the things that you know from doing those things and just reading is that where two different ecosystems meet up, there's this huge amount of richness, right? Like more rich where there's a boundary, not a boundary. I'm thinking of your words too, where there's like this weaving together of those two ecosystems. That's where the most rich life is. And so I don't know, that just comes up in my mind as you're talking about the culture contact. Could you talk about that?
So that is so completely true. So in as you said, in those zones where two things come together, you learn the truths about the so-called original elements because you see them in contrast to something fairly specific. And then you see the interaction between those, usually more than two elements, right? But just to make life easy, you can break it down to that, you know, basic two. And then you can see an outcome, the fusion, where some things come up to the surface and other things sort of are maybe just stay as they seem like they are, with the assumption that they're not changing all the time anyway. So you get this idea that, oh, well, these are two fixed entities that come together and pass through, and then some other thing, just like color, right? You'd say, I have this color, and then I'm going to blend them together on the page. And, you know, the assumption is that you had a solid color that would never change and another color that would never change. And then all of a sudden now you have this new color, and et cetera. And you see this with people, you see this with, you know, it's so true. And in weaving also, the thing about it is, if I just move back, well, you see the threads intersecting and moving. And when they interlace, you know, you create either another color, another texture, or something happens at that point. And the thing about weaving a cloth is that it looks like it's finished. It looks like a single entity, but it is always in motion. The motion might be very small and you can't see it.
Right.
But the fact that it is cloth, the testimony that you can bend and flex it, means that those positions are never fixed. And they're always sort of on their path, right?
Right.
And so that culture contact thing for me, I've always been interested in this kind of blending of elements on the surface of the textile itself anyway, to see how much more I can get. So always wanted to get something that's more than the sum of its parts.
Right.
And so way back in the day, I would always try to stick things into the interlacements, like foreign elements, just bring them in there and like shove them in, and, you know, but then I got to a point where I really wanted to limit what I was looking at. And so I just used, you know, the very same elements all the time and tried to see how much more I could bring out of that. Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, I did that for a long time, and I did, you know, images of things and et cetera. And what was interesting to me was my focus was really about the structures that I was creating that generated these outcomes.
Yeah.
Other people who weren't aware of that and really had no reason to care about it, or very little reason, would see the imagery that was presented. And to me, that was just a perfect analysis of, or it just like a perfect representation of, you know, real life. That the things that make you or it or whatever phenomena, what it is, are just as much about the elements that create it as they are about how it appears.
Right. That's really interesting. I mean, it's sort of like a can't see the forest for the trees kind of experience, you know. I mean, and also I think one of the things that you and I talked about was sort of interconnection, right? So that idea that, you know, we're all connected, which obviously we all are, right? And you know, one little thing can change everything in your life, in a recipe, in your and weaving whichever color you decide to bring to the top, you know. The other thing that strikes me as you're talking about this, Cathryn, is every color class I've ever taken, right, where you lay that beautiful, delicious colored paper down and you change the color next to it, it totally changes your perception of what's happening in that, with those colors and at where they meet, you know. And I think that's a really fascinating thing about your work is, I know when I've come to your studio and been able to see how you work in that loom. Will you point to your loom right behind you?
So it's that sort of white rectangle with the blue bar. The bar there is the thing that I pull back and forth. And right now there's like a table that I built in front of it that I'm painting some paper yarn there. So it's kind of just still sitting there, but
so it's just, I know you had talked to me before about, you know, your decision to bring, I know when I talk to people about your work, about how all the colors there are there all the time, right? It's just whichever ones are brought to the top or the medium level or whatever, and what's on the very back, they're surprising. When you look at the backside, they're surprisingly beautiful as well. Even though that's not your intention of the piece of art that you want people to see, they're really interesting, you know. And so it's just the colors and textures you choose to bring to the top are the thing that make that perception, you know, what you're looking at, that perception of what it is, but there's all this stuff happening behind it to make that perception possible. And I think that's really interesting. I think we should probably wrap it up just so that we give people small tidbits to listen to. And I really appreciate your meeting this morning and talking about your work. What's your newest piece that you have on display at the Ann Arbor Art Center right now in the WSG show?
So right now I have a piece called Shoreline, and it's derived from these color drawings, which I never got to explain, you know, when I went there. They're from these color drawing. That doesn't seem like the right word, but it is that. And it has pretty much all of the yarns in there are hand dyed. I dyed them all, and and so it really that's what's there.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, I can't wait to look at that piece more in depth. I was there yesterday briefly, but I hope everyone can visit our show. Thanks so much for meeting this morning, Cathryn. I always love hearing about your process.
Thanks.
Okay, take care.